I'm just asking where we. Okay.
Done.
You call through it? Yeah.
This is really pushing.
All right, we can tag team it. Good evening. I'd like to call the Human Affairs and Racial Conciliation Commission meeting of Thursday, March 9th, 2023 to order. And with that, I'd like to start tonight's meeting with a brief moment of silence. Thank you. Next on our agenda is our public comment period. Looking out into the audience, to the vast audience here at City Council, and I don't see a whole lot of folks, but is there anyone online that would like to speak? I see Commissioner Carroll is joining us via Zoom. Hey, Carroll.
Hello.
Good afternoon, good evening. Any comments from the public? I don't see any. Co-Chair, Mr. Harris?
I see no comments from the public. I'd like to welcome our two new members
Yes, there you go.
to the meeting. You want to introduce yourselves?
Figure this out. My name is Tom Orth, O-R-T-H, and I'm honored to be here. We have been here 4 years. And a friend from church, Keith Waring, recommended that I get involved, and I'm excited. I've been involved in social justice, racial justice, immigration justice for the poor for many, many years. And I'm a retired college and high school teacher and coach.
All right. And I believe the recommendation of appointment actually is filling the seat from Councilman Shiley's.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Thanks for the reminder. Chair. Can you tell us a little bit more about, you said you've been here for 4 years, just some background.
Sure. I'm 72. I retired from high school and college teaching 10 years ago. I ran out of gas. My wife has been with American Airlines for 44 years, and we're native Cincinnatians. We, when I retired, we moved for her job, first to Chicago for a few years, then to Charlotte. And we have a son and a daughter and 4 of our 6 grandkids here after Mary Beth retired 4 years ago. And we have another set of children and grandchildren in DC. So it was either move to Washington or Charleston. And wasn't much of a decision.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're thrilled to be here. I'm a Xavier University grad, Cincinnati, my undergrad and my master's in education. And we intentionally joined St. Patrick Historic Black Catholic Church. When we were in Charlotte, we had friends from Our Lady of Conciliation, which is a historic Black Catholic church. And they said, when you move to Charleston, you ought to check out St. Patrick. And so we've been there for 4 years. So if anybody has any questions.
No, I appreciate the introduction and a little bit of the history. We want to thank you for joining, and we look forward to the really good conversations that we will have together as a team. So
I'm excited to be here.
Yeah. Thanks, Councilman Waring, if you're listening, which you're probably not. And former Councilwoman Del Chapo's here.
So I'm Marie Del Chapo. I don't know, people know enough about me already.
Yes.
Or you can Google me. I was elected to office, so I'm sure it's on the internet somewhere. I'm from Charleston. I grew up here, went away to college and stayed away for about 14 years and moved back here about a decade ago. So I do marketing and public relations for an architecture firm, Stubbs Muldrow Heron, SMHA. And got it.
Representing District One.
District 1, yes.
Which I can't remember.
Dan Moran.
Oh, I know,
Which
I
is
know where
that?
Daniel, what District 1 is. I was, who was the city council representative? I can't remember if it was boy.
Well, I mean,
Yeah,
after
boy.
me, does it even
Yeah,
matter?
no one can fill those shoes.
Boy,
I
correct.
do want to brag on Marie just briefly. You know, she was on council for 2 years. And I always felt that although we would disagree on some issues, like both of us, very respectful. And I always believed that Marie was leading from the heart and always had her constituents' interest at heart and really was the priority. And having been on council for 3 years, that's not always the case. So I do want to say thank you, Marie, for joining. I know you're going to be here with heart and soul and mind, and it's important. So thank you.
It's also important to note that Marie served on the special commission. So for those of you who did not serve, we have another veteran of the wars who can provide some perspective on the activity of the special commission. Note officially that we do have a quorum. The requirement for quorum is 5, and I believe we have 8.
Yep.
8 commissioners in the house. Oh, 9.
Yeah, Carol's on.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8.
And then with that, I thanks Jerry for taking time to introduce. Did you go by Mr. Orth first name? We go by first name, so Tom. So Tom and Marie, thank you for joining us, and thanks Jerry for making sure that we did acknowledge them. Next on the agenda is our Harks manager update. And that's Adrian Swinton. If you want to take it over from there.
Approval of minutes.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm moving ahead. All those in favor? Okay.
Could is it possible to change invocation in the minutes to moment of silence in the title because?
Sure, but oh, in the minutes it says invocation. I got you. Yep. Duly noted. We'll make that change. So can I hear a motion to approve the minutes of 2/9/23 meeting amended? Amended. Can I get a motion?
There are a couple other corrections, I think, to be made.
Okay,
At the point in the discussion. Where here it is on page 2. The first full paragraph there, Commissioner Jackson said that Co-Chair Harris was almost an original member. I think that should read Co-Chair Harris is a member of the Police Citizens Advisory Committee.
Okay.
Wasn't originally. I believe that's the. I think that's the only correction.
is that it?
Yeah.
All right, so can I have a motion to approve the minutes of 2/9/23 with the 2 changes?
Yes, I accept those amendments.
All right,
Second.
thank you. Motion was seconded. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, that motion passes. Those minutes are approved. Next up on the agenda is our Hark managers update.
Yes, thank you, Jason. So just very briefly, I have very minimal updates, but I want to thank everyone who came to the press conference for the infantry, African-American Infantry Regiment that was held here at City Hall. That was very moving press conference, and it was very timely. I also have his card and the rawhide. So anyone who are interested in the book and learning more about that regiment, I believe it was 371. 471. Thank you. And so on yesterday, I wasn't originally invited. So it just happened that someone who was already invited me. So I don't know all the details and I'm still trying to filter through them, but there is a water plan that's happening. And I went on yesterday to the Clemson Design Center. And one particular area that they're focusing on is the Rosemount area. And they focused on the peninsula on yesterday. And at that meeting, they did a lot of engineer lingo. And I don't understand, but the environmental justice part I do. And so we did a huddle and I have the huddle information for the people who I was huddling with and also those engineer information. But it happened at Clemson Design Center and I wasn't aware that there was going to be a water plan placed. They're coming back in April to discuss the rest, I guess, the rural areas of Charleston. And I wish you were there, Alvin, because you probably could have helped me filter through the engineer. If I knew, I would have invited you. But when I find out the information, I'll definitely extend that and what's going on with the water plan. And also on Saturday is the workshop. So the workshop will begin promptly at 9 and it will end at 1. So it's 9 to 1 this Saturday. Breakfast and lunch will be provided and they will give breaks. And so for the new team members, that workshop is being facilitated by Good Stop. So Good Stop Consulting. So we have 3 workshops. We missed the first one. So we're adding 2 hours onto this Saturday. So it's 9 to 1. And I sent out the calendar invite that I believe everyone accepted, except for those who, had an issue and declined. And that concludes my updates. Do you have a question?
Yeah, well, I'll ask my last question first. So is there any recommended, homework or things that we should do ahead of Saturday, or should we just come rested and?
You should just come with
Ready.
an open mind.
Okay, good. I can do that.
Mhm.
And not to differ from what you reported about the water plan, but
Mhm.
it was my understanding that there is a special plan that's being done just for Rosemont. That it will be a companion, I think, but it's a very targeted look at Rosemont's conditions currently,
Mhm.
and then the changes that would need to be put into place in order to keep Rosemont within the framework that the Army Corps of Engineers Peninsula, perimeter barrier report recommended that Rosemont not be inside of any sort of perimeter barrier
Okay.
system, but would be a neighborhood that would be eligible for adaptation in terms of raising the homes to a proper elevation and things like that. And at that point, there was a lot of pushback about
Yeah.
what that would really look like and why would it have to be different for a longstanding historic Black neighborhood on the peninsula. So that's what I understand. They got a special subsidy in order to do just Rosemont as a companion. And I do think that we should follow along with that in a lot of detail.
Right.
Question in another area. At the February 14th council meeting, the report was received. Has there been any follow-up to our report?
Oh, no, I haven't had follow-up from that report. A couple of council people did call me though and contact me about the report, stating the report went over well. I didn't receive any other response.
So the next item on our agenda is the follow-up on the progress report. We, at our last meeting, made the decision about the next to the culture and internal review processes to move forward. But we also, Harold Jackson made the observation that we had not finished we have indicated that for the three sections that we had looked at, the council, we were recommending that the council take up, the council standing committees and public safety take up the criminal justice and community development and transportation take up the mobility and housing and economic empowerment sections. But we hadn't, there's work to be done specifically. The council did not take action saying that we're accepting. There were recommendations, which was basically that they take the recommendations from the special commission report and forward them to those council subcommittees for them to schedule discussions. So we have to, one of the things that we have to do is follow up in terms of when those discussions will happen in those subcommittees. So that's one piece of work that we have to do. Any thoughts about that process?
I don't know. I haven't thought about this in any sort of framed discussion format, Jerry, and I will go back and read the report that was actually given to council, but I don't recall that we made it quite so definitively clear that all we were asking of the council at large and their staff was to put on each of the standing committee's agendas the specific recommendations that, you know, were attached to the special commission report for each one of those topics. I thought we sort of massaged them in ways that we wanted the council to think, maybe, for an example, because I was with Alvin on the economic empowerment, and then we talked about that more holistically in terms of how it can combine in with the housing mobility goals and strategies, that we were going to try to make some connections between current issues that are in front of the city, like the low line, like the bus rapid transit, redevelopment opportunities, and then directly connect them to some of the things that the subcommittees had studied in detail over that year and a half. So I wouldn't fault the council, from my limited memory of what I'm saying right now, for not really putting any of the recommendations back on their agenda. I do think we need to help them be more strategic and see the recommendations as the tapestry being woven underneath some of the current events that the city is, you know, tasked to be responsible to accomplish. So union pier is another big example of that. So I don't know. I think we need to have more more of our working groups take into consideration some of those individual recommendations, and then maybe put them in a more descriptive framework that we can turn back to the council.
Carol, you hit the nail right in the head, because when we met this earlier in the week, Jerry and Adrian talked about process. You know how much I love process. And I think as council members, it'd be critically important to see in one document all of the priority recommendations that we've come up with through the previous three. So it's just remind me, mobility and housing,
Economic empowerment.
criminal justice. Those need to be parsed out. We need to have a very clear, it needs to say criminal justice, here are the recommendations, and here is the standing committee it's going to, which is obviously public safety. That way, as council members, we could see those, and then myself, Adrian, and Jerry can begin working with Jennifer and the clerk of council and making sure that those get put on the appropriate agenda moving forward. But we have to prioritize those recommendations as a group. So we've got three that have already been completed for the most part. Still got some work to do with that, and then we've got history and culture and internal, which are in process right now. So I guess to Carol's point, it'd be nice as a council to be able to see on one document, here's all the recommendations and here's what standing committees they're going to. That way we can hold them accountable. For example, Councilman Mitchell accountable to make sure that gets on the agenda.
So just for purposes, our report submitted to the council in December 20th did have recommendations, not the specific levels that we talked about here. But there were recommendations that have not been acted on. One of those was that all city departments participate in the city Charleston Equity Core Group. Vacancies on the commission be filled. That the city prioritize the city master plan resilience and equity element recommendations that's in their master plan. In the city master plan, that the city prioritize implementation of the city master plan community engagement recommendations, which is again a portion of the master plan that speaks to how the city more effectively engages the community in its deliberations and planning and implementation. We also asked the city begin to utilize the racial equity framework adopted in the city master plan, which is at the back end of the resilience and equity section. And that the standing committees on community development, public safety, schedule review of SCRC final report recommendations in those areas. So those recommendations were set forward in a general sense. And to your point, Carol, the idea of identifying specific actions to be prioritized and taken in real time. For example, at the last city council meeting, there was a grant application approved to the Bloomberg Foundation for $500,000 around questions of preservation work in settlement communities. That's something that's relevant to the history and culture component. Okay, that's moving forward. And also the police department put forward the proposal for an evaluation of the racial bias audit. Okay, and that item was approved, but also forwarded to the city public safety committee for additional review and comment. So those are examples of real-time things that were embedded in the special commission report that are popping up. And as we've talked about, the low line and the rapid transit project are all moving right along, as well as the flood mitigation work. All those are real-time things that need to be monitored back against the special commission report information that we get from the core groups, so that we're kind of moving things in sync both with the council and what our deliberations are. So that's how we get that work done, because we're not structured. You know, the 3 work groups that looked at those first 3 sets of recommendations. All right, do we want to continue those? All right, or that's it. Again, that's more work. How do we proceed? How do we think we want to proceed with doing that?
I very much appreciate how Jason outlined it, that you have all of these, you know, I'm kind of envisioning like a spreadsheet, and you have all of those recommendations, the appropriate council committee to which it should be sent, and then some sort of, you know, like you're mentioning these things that have already been done. If somebody is not as diligent as we are at looking at agendas and watching meetings, it's easy to lose track. Whereas if there was like a live document that it's, you know, okay, well, this went before council and this went to Ways and Means and, you know, all these kind of things, that becomes very powerful. And that right there becomes your progress report of, you know, here are the recommendations that we outlined, and here's what happened on what date. And it is a nice way to keep everybody up to date in real time on what's happening. And, you know, as a former council member, you can't, like, no one can describe to you how much responsibility you feel weighted on your chest all the time. And I felt like every single resident of the city of Charleston's happiness was my responsibility. And so if you get these reports and you do them and you are so well intentioned and you know, but it's like, I mean, there's things just flying at you all the time, and it's almost like a triage of like, all right, I gotta do this because these people's trash didn't get picked up today, and then I got a busted sidewalk over here, and so I'm, you know, sometimes things we don't mean them to, but they can get lost, and we have something as a priority and then we get pulled in another direction. So I think something that makes it very, very clear and very simple is super helpful to the council members and to and even to the public. I mean, that's blatant transparency right there. No questions asked as to what's going on and how.
Other comments?
It just seems like absent Jerry being at the meeting and finding out that these two topics were addressed that are pertinent to our structure here, how would we have known about them?
City council.
City council. So apparently you were at city council. Well, I mean, but until we come here tonight, we don't know that these two items were part of the agenda that had been addressed and could have been incorporated into subcommittee meetings, right? Because Jerry, you said there was one that was history and culture and one that was something else that were addressed at last city council meeting. And I'm sorry, I don't normally track city council meetings because, yeah. And obviously I can see why, but well, it seems like we need a feedback loop, and that may be a spreadsheet. It may be something else, but something that when things come up, how do we get to know about
So
them?
it's almost. So we have the original report has a spreadsheet with recommendations, and in some of the subcommittees identified which of the standing committees should be responsible for it. And then which administrative unit, if you would, should be tracking, what department should be tracking. What we have, if, for example, there is an action. So in the, let's take cultural heritage, right? There was not, as I recall, a recommendation that the city go after additional resources, all right, for this particular activity, all right? But it is, the resources that they're going after does promote or will fuel a recommendation. So we'd have to add that in. So the whole notion of monitoring the agenda to see, okay, there was an action taken, okay? It's related to history and culture, historic sites, settlement communities. How does that get on the agenda? And then how do we follow up? It's one thing to track and monitor, it's one thing to track it and note it. The other thing is how are we going to talk about it, all right, and give advice or not give advice, all right, and the like. And this begins to load additional monitoring. We could say, Adrian, we want you to monitor the city council agendas against the 7 areas, identify things that are happening. Adrian, we want you to monitor the standing committees of city council, all right, and flag, you know, but after she flags it, who's going to do any kind of analysis or further discussion, or how do we further talk about it, either after the fact or after the fact? That's what I'm asking. How do we see that role for commissioners, all right, as it relates to doing that follow-up work more intensely?
It might help shape our meeting agendas. You know, if we see what is going on, you know, again, I mean, in my brain, I'm picturing a spreadsheet, whether that's what happens or not, but that's just how I'm conceptualizing it. So as you go through that and you see this, that, and the other has been discussed, here's where things are, you know, kind of lingering and whatnot, that might help drive conversations of the working groups in here, and even, you know, zero in on conversations that we want to place on our agenda or things like that. It's one thought I had, help keep things on track and keep things progressing.
So I just want to be sure that like we understand that this is a proactive group and not a reactive group. Right. So if we're responding to something that's on the agenda, then we're being reactionary as opposed to being proactive. Our job here is to basically apply pressure at all times. So, yeah, I mean, we can do both, but I just want to be sure that, you know, we understand that we're supposed to be proactive. So if anything, we should know what's going to be on the agenda before it's on the agenda, because we put it there. So.
Part of our job is forward the recommendations, stimulate discussion and action at certain standing to go to council for action. So that's a proactive. At the same time, there are things that are happening that intersect with the conversations that we're having, might accelerate, right, or actually act against something that we've been advocating. And our voice needs to be, we need to be aware of it so our voices can be heard as part of that deliberation.
I think while the city is learning how to incorporate the HARC's mission, that we should be a stop along the way for you know, a lot of the decision making that is happening ultimately at the council level. And maybe that sounds, you know, bureaucratic and burdensome in the beginning, but if we don't have a seat at those discussions while they're still in the formation and preliminary, you know, research study and framing stages, then we will always be reactionary. We'll be chasing our agenda tails and saying, well, if you asked us about this, we would have told you that, but it's already on the books, or we'd have to be asking for amendments or whatever, you know, finality has been determined. So I think it's a matter of growing our value, which puts a lot of burden on us to make sure that what we do say is of value to the decision-making that the city is responsible to accomplish. We can't be known as just the, you know, naysayers or the overreactionaries or whatever people would want to expect of a group that's charged with the kind of role that we hope we will have. So I do feel like we're in a time of learning lab, making it up as we go along on a lot of levels. And you know, it's just the way I'm wired. We have spreadsheets that have each one of the topics that were, you know, researched and studied and turned inside out and back, but we don't have the connections. Well, we don't have the connections that, so for example, when we talked about using what's going to be going on with the low line, we know that we want some sort of economic empowerment opportunities for the African-American community that's all, you know, all around there, and to jumpstart businesses. And we know that we want, you know, it to be the highest and best opportunities for housing and the mobility that the low line stands for. So I think, again, if our job is sort of like being slightly ahead of the curve and helping the council, but the rest of the committee grow our cultural appreciation for how we shouldn't be making any place-making decisions without the HARC lens. Let's just term it like that. And I don't know how to do that, you know, so efficiently or scientifically. So
But I
Oh,
that's
think
where I'm
that's a-
sort of
That's a
stuck.
great point, is like, we, you know, even saying like, we know we want to do these things, but only some people know that. It's nothing is documented that then becomes more or less like a public record of, okay, these are the things they've got their eye on, and to the point about being reactionary versus proactive. You know, these are the things they are keeping their eye on, and they're constantly updating what's going on and where, and having these conversations and seeing what's been stagnant and hasn't been moving, and just something that I think gets eyes on it and becomes a little, you know, a way, an accountability measure, and again, a way to be transparent. And because I hate to see, you know, too, Carol, like you hate when things fall in the cracks.
Yeah.
And something that it's like very easy for for folks to see, because there's no worse feeling.
I love your idea of a living spreadsheet. And I don't want it to all fall on Adrian.
No.
So I'm wondering, when you look at the Equity Commission report, there are, lead staff oversight, due date. It doesn't take much to add some columns if we need them, but just use that format to now track things going forward. And I do think I think each of us is going to need to have some specific things that we are tasked with tracking. Not that we can't help each other do that, but I think we're going to need to be. Actually, on second thought, I think Jerry should do it all. That we're responsible for certain areas, and we can, Jerry can tell us things that we need to know when he finds them out.
So a couple of quick observations. Your point about commissioners, at least for the 3 years that we've already done, all right, taking a responsibility, holding hands, say, I will pay attention to what's going on with economic empowerment and whatever information that Adrian can generate or any of us can generate. We know that that person, all right, is our lead person in trying to look at that. Carol's point earlier, I think, was that we submitted vague recommendations, all right? They have to be followed up on, okay? And I'm saying we don't have a mechanism to do that. If the mechanism that we're going to say is that a commissioner will say, I'm going to be the point on item X, all right? And both in terms of what subcommittee is moving forward or what might be happening with city council agendas, all right, and be responsible back to us for kind of working with Adrian to make sure we know what's happening so things can come on the agenda. I think that's in the short term, that's probably with the spreadsheet about the best we can accomplish at this point. No, it's a tracking.
Yes.
We've already talked about developing a tracking
Yes.
document, so you're not, what we call it, a spreadsheet, but that's basically what we've been looking at. And so for my question now becomes, which of the commissioners, and if we can decide that now, we could maybe talk about this on Saturday as a byproduct, which of us want to take on being the point, okay, in any of the 3 areas that we've already looked at.
Excuse me. Carol Fry has his hand up.
Oh, hey, Carol.
I'm sorry, Carol.
Oh, okay, thanks. Yeah, the discussion, I think, is really a great discussion here. It's interesting. I like all the questions and points, but it raised one for me, and I guess Jason and Marie and Carol J, since you've all been on city council, is there a written process description of how to be a city council person?
I can take a stab.
It's honor.
Carol, there is no guidebook or directions to be a city council person. I mean, there's obviously a oath that we took when we were elected, but that is really, yeah, there's nothing specific.
Carol, there are a set of ordinances that governs the rules of their meetings.
Yeah.
Thou shalt do this, thou shalt not do that, and who serves on what committee.
Okay.
But the culture is not in the document.
Okay, well, I guess for me, like Alvin, and maybe some of the others, being an engineer, you basically, you have to kind of start from, you got X hours in a week and you got 52 weeks in a year, and you got these legal requirements, which are going to, meetings take up X amount of your time, and you back up from there. But I think what I'm hearing is that, because I faced this when I went to work in industry. I went to work for a company that their philosophy basically was, oh, gee, you're here, jump in the pool. And there were other companies who started by saying, okay, you have a year in training to learn how we do work and what we do. And it sounds like my general impression would be you have, certain things you're given as a city council person, but after that, it's there's really not a process described. And so that's basically, I guess, the question I had, because if we knew that and had that, that would be great, because that would help us look at how to best plug in to decisions that get made and what has to be considered in those decisions being made.
I guess, Carol, my impression to answer you would be the closest that a particular elected official would have on the council is to declare their interest in the standing committees that everyone is assigned to. So you can sort of, steer your interests to be, that's where you spend your time when you're not, literally meeting on the whole council as a whole. And then it's a matter of just being proactive to get into the midst of the staff work that's being done and, literally pick their brains on the topics that are either on your plate in the constituent district that you serve, or with the interests that you're taking on as a citywide council person. But
Okay.
you have to be proactive.
So Carol, I'm just trying to understand fully the question. So is it also, are you also curious about how, for example, an ordinance, like how a bill becomes a bill, how an ordinance becomes an ordinance, and what that process is like from start to finish? Is that part of your question?
It's a part of it, but I guess a bigger part was, we've seen here in the last couple of months since we've been meeting, the fact that my understanding here is that the 10-year plan for the, city council for the city council of Charleston is required by the state. You can't say, well, gee, we don't want to have one. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yes.
That is correct. The 10-year plan is required.
Yeah.
Okay, so
You want to
a part of my point here is that's been a big part of how we've come along and said, oh, let's look at how this fits in with the 10-year plan. Well, the city council, you've confirmed you can't say, well, I'm not going to do a 10-year plan that the state wants. So I guess, again, I'm going back to, if you describe the job, clearly the city council is required to put, so much time, obviously helped out by staff, to develop this 10-year plan and implement it. And that becomes a fairly significant part, I guess, of what you'd have to do at least once every 10 years. And so, yeah, I'm not trying to get into these very specifics of, how do you get an ordinance, but I'm trying to understand, how we could best influence input into the decision-making process so that out the end comes the product, which is a decision about what's going to happen.
Go ahead, Jerry, then I do want to comment. So
One suggestion I have, and it's going to be a process thing. The council committee agenda session sheets have a section that talks about who's coordinated with. In this corporation council, this case capital project, grants management, et cetera. Perhaps what we could do is add a hark box to this, and it could be not did they sign has the office sign off on it. Do we believe it's relevant? This action is relevant or not relevant to hark? All right, is it consistent with the departmental plan to implement? And at least we would have that as a track in terms of the items. In the cases where the ordinances, that means we've got 2 or 3 meetings, all right, in a sense of a resolution. If it's going to a standing committee before going to the full council, probably it means as much as 30 days or a month or 45 days before it's actually acted on. But at least it would be a consciousness on the part of both city staff and the council, okay, that in reviewing this is a HARC related matter. Maybe this is something that the internal review committee, right, can take up as part of give priority to, so we can begin to put in place a system that's not just ours. The spreadsheet could be ours, okay? This would be a tool that could help us know what's going on, or at least have people think about, has HARC commented on it? Is it relevant to HARC or is it not relevant to HARC?
Yeah, no, that's exactly what I was hoping, that we would be asking for, that HARC would be a considered stop along the way of every decision. I mean, the sheet you've got in front of you is usually used for anything contractual or money spending. So it's not necessarily a checklist for, a bill that's going to impact the late night ordinance, for example, but at least it would be a training guide for people that say, okay, this isn't just your little normal average, commission that brings us a particular item every now and then. This it's like it's the best I can say. It is a stop along the way. We have to train ourselves that we're going to consider equity and inclusion at every opportunity for the city. And without a tool like this, I don't think that will happen. It'll be an afterthought. Some people will be more conscientious than others, but we have to train the muscle memory of what we're doing as a city.
So I just want to be respectful of our time. I want to try to distill what I've heard from several of us here in an effort to build an agenda for next time. I'm going to encourage us to think about the April meeting being a work session. And I think the tool that Marie is suggested, and I think Bonnie has agreed to, and this is the same kind of tool that we talked about. We just got to figure out what that looks like, because that will dictate our ability to be proactive as opposed to reactive. And Bob, things will come on the agenda, and I don't think it's a bad thing that things have popped up on the agenda, because we have taken, when you look at the 125 recommendations, I know 2 or 3 have already been kind of acted upon in some capacity and have made it to the agenda. But in order for us to be proactive, I think we need a transparent tool that is, I won't even call it a spreadsheet, but it's a tracking method. It's a, live, and I'm going to disagree that all of us should contribute to that. I think we contribute anecdotally to Adrian, but I think Adrian needs to be the spoke here, the centerpiece, because it's Adrian that can walk down to Jennifer's office, and it's Adrian that can speak to the department heads, because she's here to say this should be on the agenda. This is not on the CD agenda or criminal public safety agenda. It needs to be on that. I think we should assist, but Adrian, I'm sorry, but I think your role really needs to be the legislative liaison and make sure that spreadsheet gets updated, puts on the website. I'm very much like Marie in terms of systems and the PR piece of this. I mean, I think one of the things that we fail to realize is no offense, but no one's tuning into this meeting, and any positive effect is gonna have to come from us.
Right.
And it's our end product, what we put on the website, which is why I'm really particular about making sure things are updated, because it speaks volumes when folks go to the website, and this is before you got here, Adrian, and misspellings, wrong links. And Marie will, her and I, we've had this discussions, not just about HARC, but about other things. So I just want us to put our best foot forward. And I think the planning document, spreadsheet, whatever we want to call it, will be very helpful, because that's also going to keep us accountable, and it's also going to keep my colleagues accountable. Because then I can turn to Councilman Seekings, who's our chair of transportation, and say, we've got 3 or 4 things that have been log jammed. Where are they? And then I think Jerry made a good point previously. Then we can follow up with our respective council members who appointed us and say, can you help? We're trying to get this on the agenda. Can you help? So that's kind of what I've heard from everyone. I'm going to recommend that the April meeting be a working session. Maybe we break this down and you create that spreadsheet and we sit here and prioritize what recommendations need to be on that spreadsheet. Most of it's already done, so I think that's fairly easy for the most part. But I want to walk away soon and pivot from where we were, which is building and prioritizing, right? For the past 6 months. I think we got to get to a place where we're now start acting and getting things on agendas, because we're going to start getting questions very soon about what the heck you all doing? You've been building the plane for a while. Well, I want to start getting to a place soon.
So the only thing I would add to that, my notion of, each of us volunteering or identifying which area that we consider ourselves or becoming the subject matter expert for this body. So, you know, I've been doing the criminal justice stuff, so it's logical that folks might look to me. Mike is doing transportation, right? So in Alvin as an engineer, and maybe a number of community development related things that he could be. So I'm just saying for each of us, you're an educator, all right? Bob's worked in government, all right? So again, having us raise up our hands, say, I'm the subject matter expert in area X, all right? As we see what's going on, or we're proposing things, we look to that individual to be the at least initial subject matter expert. They may say, you know, I know this much, but I know somebody that knows a lot, to bring them to our table for conversation. So I mean, I think that will help us move along, in addition to the spreadsheet.
But I think it'll come forward more naturally if we have, for me, you're with the process and, you know, laying it all out, prioritizing, having something that we can track and, you know, cover its eyes. It's all great, but I do feel at the end of the day, we have to share the connections between the disparities subjects that we're all trying to serve. And if we don't do that, then it's going to be easier to pick us off. I don't want it to be easy to pick off. And in ways that we don't have time to do a fair housing, update or resolution or whatever we would put that forward to have an ordinance that just says City of Charleston follows these fair housing laws. Why should that be so hard? But it's a small little thing that's, we had on an agenda for the last year. So I do feel like we have to help each other see the bigger picture that the city is actually dealing with that. And make ourselves relevant to that with the disparities that we're serving.
Let me just one add to this, and maybe this might address your question, Carol, regarding like legislative process. I personally have had no issues getting items on the agenda that I care about and my constituents care about because I follow the process.
Right.
I can't say the same for my fellow council members. So there's a process and intentionality and a strategy to get stuff done. When we just go off the reservation and start doing our own thing, it's not a shock that things go haywire. I'm saying that to say that there is a process. It's been codified in our recent, we just had a rules ad hoc, which is actually going on right now,
Right.
led by Chairman Brady, to really start thinking about processes and codifying some of these things. So we know as council members, if you want to get something on the agenda, you do X, Y, and Z. All I'm saying is you build that on top of what we're doing. We just need to be intentional and strategic. We can't just throw things on the agenda and hope that they're going to get there and then complain that they're not on the agenda. And I guess that's where I can help and Carol can help and Marie can help, but we understand the process.
Right.
And not
much, some things, some things we look at and say, all right, it's best to wait, put it on this agenda. Because the end result is going to be better. Like 2 weeks is not going to.
No. Persistence pays, but it doesn't have to.
So, as it relates to follow up, working on the spreadsheet, Jason and I as co-chairs will be in communication with the standing committee chairs to make sure that they know that we're expecting something to happen, be able to give some feedback at our next meeting. We'll be looking at the tracking mechanism, okay, and continue the discussion about us divvying up the work as subject matter experts. Yeah. Okay.
And I say that, and I'll remind them that here, for our April, both of us will be Mind if I share? Or can I share that?
Wait, taking your wife's.
Yeah, Elvin and I will both be out of the country, so,
Well, maybe we should, can we reschedule?
so either we can reschedule.
Have some levity.
So anyways, it's gonna we come to the next meeting with at least a draft or the template that's created, so we can just start plugging in. Adrian, that's a question for you. So we can start plugging in some of these recommendations. Okay.
So moving on to the next item, updates from the subcommittees. History and culture.
I'm happy to give the update for history and culture. So let's see, where's my note? Okay, so Adrian and Jason and Adam and Jerry and Bob and I met via Zoom. And we went through the Equity Commission's recommendations and created a basic timeline and assessed the interaction between the Equity Commission plan and the city master plan. And there was a lot of good overlap in this one. So that was good. Sometimes, the only additions we made to the 12 recommendations in the city plan were, some of them had a focus on Black people and Indigenous people of color in those recommendations already, and some did not. And so a lot of times we were just saying, yep, pay attention to these populations. And one of the things that I liked about the Equity Commission report on the history and culture part is the first recommendation. They said, this is really important. And so we really want you to do this one first. And so that was nice. And that was to create a commission that would review art and monuments and such around the city. And so I didn't say this necessarily in the meeting, but one of the things I think I started thinking of later is one way sometimes things get delayed or have not the right people on the committee or the commission is how that is structured. So I would like us soon to recommend an art review board and to make sure that the right people get on that board, and obviously including many Black and Indigenous people of color. So anything else that you would add, Adrian or Bob?
This kind of came up as a comparison to the Board of Architectural Review as a concept. It had been mentioned, in the documentation already. It doesn't exist currently in city government. So this is where we kind of fell into, we don't know how government works. That's another subcommittee. How do we get something like that created? And there were one or two topics that we looked at that really looked like they belonged to a different subcommittee. But that's kind of down in the details. We're still getting back into some of that. I can't remember what it was because I was on a phone, so it was kind of hard to make sure I was listening all the time. And
those were actually city plan parts that we said, this isn't really for history and culture. So I don't think we have to worry about those as much.
yeah, but I think we need to get them to whoever should be.
Oh, okay.
Right.
I can do that. I know what you mean.
So what's your work plan? Would we be meeting again? Do you need input from those of us who are not on that committee in order to come back to something for us to discuss it?
I think that what we would like to do is talk with some of the people that were on the Equity Commission or set up a meeting with the Equity Commission, and then really be able to go from there, because I do think our first step is to figure out that art review board.
So was there any mention of comparison or contrast or conjoin with the History Commission? Is that in the?
I didn't see that specifically, but I also don't know much about the History Commission. We brought it up in our committee, but I don't know much about that.
There's also an arts commission. City also has an arts commission. So I don't know. It might
So we need to figure those
Maybe-
things out too.
Yeah. I do feel
somehow
like-
gelling with those two standing. Or those commissions and seeing kind of where they are and what's happening.
Part of the question was how often those commissions met and did things.
Right, I mean, I think that's the compare and contrast
yeah.
exercise that really needs to, maybe they need to be, helped to be more relevant or. I don't know, I don't know the answer. I know several people are probably tired of being on the history commission and several people are probably still very, happy and proud to be there. So I do feel like that needs to be a consideration that we make proactively ahead of time.
I was on the Arts Commission when I was on council, and there's some, well-known prominent figures of the arts community who serve on that. So I think it might be helpful to,
Like Jonathan Green,
right, or Jonathan Green.
who sort of covers a lot of bases.
Just to kind of get a sense of what's happening and what's missing and what are we duplicating? What are we not doing?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah, yeah.
So are we gonna,
It's tough.
I think, Jerry, are we meeting again? History?
Well, what I'm hearing is that there's at least one conversation that they want to have with the commission. The commissioners from the subcommittee from the special commission. It also sounds like we need some information about the existing art commission and history commission. All right, what their charges are and what the recommendation. I think there's some pretty substantial documentation in terms of what other folks are doing. So the compare and contrast, so there's at least those two things have to be accomplished before you come back with a with and know that this particular recommendation was one of the controversial, if you will, items.
Which one was that? Which?
The establishment of the commission on art, public art and stuff like that did draw attention. All right, so it is not non-controversial. It's as it should sound like it's not controversial. It can be. So you need to keep that in mind as we bring forward the recommendation.
So Bob was on the phone, so I sort of referred that he is the subcommittee leader.
But that's okay. And by the way, thank you for doing the homework beforehand and kind of, because we really did read through a lot of the existing documentation and it was all thanks to Barbara. So thank you.
And the history and cultural component does have a lot of documentation.
Oh, it does.
There's a lot of documentation. That's a lot of work to do. Okay. And we should.
And as far as follow on, I mean, really, it's what kind of scheduling we can get. Depending how this meeting went, we're going to see if we can maybe chat about good times to get together and things. And then, of course, there's Saturday we can get together too, depending how long this meeting goes. But part of it is just figuring out process planning. And part of it is, we're figuring out Adrienne, everything she can kind of be the shepherd in the middle. And we're building all, as you say, we're building this as we go. So,
Yeah, so what I can do is see when these commissions do meet, if they're active or not. And we can go to those meetings as well, or create a meeting with just the commissioner, whoever chairs these commission, history and art. And also with the special commissions, get a meeting with Dr. Knight. She led it, and whoever else is on there who's willing to have a meeting. So we can arrange it.
Okay. So internal review? Anybody got a report from internal review? I know I got on the back end of that conversation.
I was not on that call.
I thought Councilmember Stevens was taking.
Did you all not meet or? Oh,
We did meet, Councilman Seegings was the one who did take the lead when it came to internal reviews. So just briefly, I thought he would be here today to give his update. We went through the recommendations briefly and we are, there are some things that we want to look at when it comes to the overall, when it comes to HR. So how HR operates, anything from recruitment to retention. Is there any collaboration opportunities for the equity core group? Because we know that group has representation from the different divisions here at the city and what that would look like. He is looking at it almost like a big picture when it comes to how the organization is structured. We had a conversation about looking at it that way in contrast to what we can actually do when it relates to equity for the employees. So it's big picture versus how we would be able to maneuver with the employees. But that's it in a nutshell.
So in that conversation, as I recall, one of the recommendations is that each of the departments have an equity plan, right? And if each of the departments had an equity plan, that it might then feed into the question of whether, because there's some discussion whether or not merger and that merger restructuring would make sense and things of that nature. But the idea that any such recommendations would come out of the plan and what sense interacting between two units to make sure that they would be most efficient and effective as related to executing their job, around at the same time achieving the equity and resilience kinds of concerns articulated in the master plan. So we don't have a new next scheduled meeting?
No, we don't. We don't have a next scheduled meeting.
And was it contemplated that like History and Culture is planning to have a conversation with the Equity Commission nerds?
Yes, yes.
All right,
So
they can
they'll,
file that same, okay.
yep.
Excuse me? Sorry, can everyone please remember to turn on their mics when they speak? Thank you.
Sorry. I thought we also agreed that we were going to take hold of Councilmember Seeking's more big picture goals or objectives that in the process of looking at departmental organizational efficiencies and synergies for function within the city, that would in itself, if we, so his example for us to consider is that we would look at the synergies between the Department of Transportation and TNT, Transportation and Transit, combined in with the planning function for the city. And in the process of thinking those two departments have similar assignments, basically, in terms of influencing development all around the city, that we would find that we would be curing or improving inequities among staffing opportunities just by having those departments work more closely together. So I thought that we left that work session agreeing that we were gonna go along with that as an illustration to ourselves, not really publicize it to any great extent beyond looking at the numbers, right? We were supposed to be looking at the numbers of staff and the pay levels and job functions that if they were merged could potentially raise the boats of all the staff that were involved. But I don't know how to, I don't know if how you went about anything after that, Adrian, so.
Yeah, so I did look at a couple of things briefly, but I also was waiting because I have a meeting next Thursday with the HR, with K Cross. So I wanted if information would, sometimes you see information, but it's outdated. So I wanted to get the most recent.
Adrian, if I can add to what Carol was talking about, that's somewhat related, as part of the internal discussion. Was there any recommendations that talked about, a review of processes and how some of those processes, and Carol knows I'm on this bandwagon, such as BAR and DRB, how those processes may certainly how those processes could have unintentional consequences and negative impacts, not just on Black and brown folks, but our entire community, but disproportionately affects Black and brown folks in our community. Any discussions on those recommendations and the internal review to basically look at the process?
No, but that's
Okay.
something we can do.
Because as I've, maturing from the special commission to where I am today, to me, that is one piece that is critical, because it's not so much the ordinance language, right? And it's not, so it's something that happens as the ordinance is applied, I guess, the way to look at it internally. Yeah, the execution of that ordinance. So sometimes it's not the legislative piece, it's more about the internal workings of departments and how they communicate or don't communicate.
Okay.
That's what I was gonna ask is, under where does things like the makeup of BAR, DRB, things like that come into consideration? The city moving forward with really taking a deep dive into rewriting zoning ordinances, like is HARC somehow engaged in that? And like the Peninsula Plan, I know they've hired the consultants to work on that. Is that something to get involved in?
Yeah.
I would think especially the
Yes, I
zoning stuff for
think-
sure. I just didn't know like where that would fall and in which group or because internal review, that could be a lot of things. So I think it does need to be like honed in. I do agree that there needs to be a focus of, because otherwise that could be everything.
So quick observation.
Yeah.
I believe Housing and Mobility had some observation about the BAR. The recommendation in History and Culture suggesting that another commission be created, right? It's kind of internal review. In the criminal justice report, the discussion about looking at ordinances that might be applied inappropriately or leave all things that could, right, come under internal review, but they're not there in the way the reports were generated because we did not have time to do that cross integration. So some of that we have to do, right? So if we in fact want some of the work around this commission, all right, once you guys finish cooking with it, all right, it may wind up showing itself up under internal review. Similarly, the review of the ordinances in the criminal justice area might show up in an internal review as part of the work that the city council is asked to do or somebody. So we need to, and this is as much for our new members, all right? We need to recognize that everything that is under the categories in the special commission report, all right, don't just belong in one section, that they may cross fertilize, and the strategy and the notion of approaching and moving it may require that we think about it a little differently and harmonize different sections.
I mean, I do think that's the organic nature of the HARC, as the things that are on the city's plate. We have to insert ourselves that there is relevant areas of our interest and, evaluation, however we're going to talk about ourselves. We obviously are not going to be where any sort of decisions are made, but in terms of understanding the values that HARC is tasked to carry forward on behalf of the city, and then making it clear that those values, are worked on during the creation of the Peninsula Plan, the water plan. I mean, all of these things that could be seen as, totally separate. We have to make the case that they're not, in the same way that, we've already identified the city plan for all of the commonalities that are there. So I do think that that's sort of the organic part of how we see ourselves.
Question, you see in those kinds of areas. Not, you won't go inside. I mean, it's entertaining, I'm just kind of roughly that.
Adrian, thank you for the article on the hate crimes bill. I was actually at the State House yesterday. I didn't get to see the discussion because they did it at the end of the day. But it was my first time going to the State House and lobbying our legislators. And if you haven't done it, it's exhilarating and exhausting. I was not there. They started late on this, but we were lobbying them on well, so one of the things on the hate crimes bill that was hanging them up is they don't want to include LGBTQ people in the hate crime. The Freedom Caucus doesn't want to include LGBTQ people in it, and we were lobbying them to not pass all of the terrible bills that are attacking transgender kids in our state, and helping them understand.
So Bonnie, not to interrupt you, but I would love to take credit, but I can't. So Jerry, Jerry actually sent this link in an email. And so I thought that it would be great just if we had like a paper copy so that we could have, so we can read over it, and I attached a couple of things like who vote, how the votes went. So thank you, Jerry.
I think that it's excellent that it passed the House this early in the first year of a 2-year session. That's nothing to take lightly, but I also think we should not take for granted that it still has the final hurdle of the Senate, which is where it got hung up last year after being in front of the whole legislature for 2 years. So,
So you can put pressure on your state senator.
correct. Yeah, the only good news about that is it's a fewer number,
So.
and they're less inclined to be as divided around, inflamed topics as the House is
So one of the
proving itself to be.
recommendations from the criminal justice subcommittee of the special commission was that the city council go on record relating to federal or state legislation, okay, communicating how they felt about it, to one, create more discussion. And I think I heard in some of the discussions, that the city of Charleston is in a better position than the state is in this regard. All right. So there would be no reason why the Hart Commission might not recommend to the city council that it adopt a resolution urging the Senate to pass the bill. And I'm using this as a test case, right, for us being proactive in something that can in fact impact this area that is part of our charge.
Yeah, I mean, the city council did pass a resolution in support of the first version of the hate crime a couple of years ago, but to have it reprised, I think would be very strategic. And now coming from a commission that didn't exist 2 years ago, I would agree. Is that something we'd have to think about right now?
Vice Chair.
That's all right. I mean, we can make a motion to,
Even though it's not on our agenda.
actually, no, can we? And no one's paying attention. to what we're doing.
Yes, you can. No, we don't have to have amendment to the agenda if we have an action. If the
Right.
commission, like someone like to
So
make it.
Carol, if you want to articulate what that would be, we can. Do we-
Well, I guess we probably should go back to the resolution that the council passed a few years ago, because that would make it the easiest on the staff work that would have to be done, to get a document on the council's.
When is it,
full
when,
council's
when's it
agenda.
going back to Senate? Like, when are they taking action,
Crossover is First week in April, April 10th.
So I'm wondering if we can get it on the last March city council agenda.
Yeah, that's just a resolution.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'll put that on my to-do list.
Great.
So, and we have a motion to recommend.
I'll make a motion that we change the agenda to be able to take up, we don't have to
You
do
don't have
that?
to do that.
Okay. And I will make a motion that supports Council Member Saccharin's willingness to research the earlier resolution that the City of Charleston Council passed a couple of years ago to send to the state legislature and now in particular, the state Senate to adopt the resolution that was passed in the House of Representatives, March 8th.
And that's House Bill 8431, just so.
8431. And
No,
that's how
no.
it will go to the Senate,
No.
8431.
8431 was the vote count,
I'm sorry.
Oh.
I'm sorry.
which I was going to make a mention while I've got the mic. The bill passed, this is important for folks that are listening, whoever's listening and fellow commission members. The bill passed 8431 with support of all the lower chambers Democrats and most of its Republicans, including much of the House's GOP leadership. The reason I'm mentioning that is this is not a divisive issue. This is a bipartisan bill, common sense. When you look at the state of South Carolina, obviously Republicans outnumber Democrats. This bill passed in the House. Wyoming is the only other state without a hate crimes statute.
That's
So this is not, trailblazing. This is something that we should have had years ago. I just want to make sure that folks, and I've said that on the record, are aware.
I'm sorry, it's 3041.
What is it?
Bill number,
3014.
3014. Yeah. Okay,
So we need a second on that. I guess I can second that motion.
okay, moved and properly second. Further discussion? All those in favor, please say indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Any abstentions? So ordered.
okay, great.
Other items for open discussion?
I just wanted to, just put a fun update and I'll send this to Adrian if she didn't already see it. So I subscribe to the Hampstead Mall newsletter that Steve Bailey, who is the cheerleader for putting Hampstead Mall back on the map of the city and literally rebuilding the park spaces that make up the 4 quadrants of Hampstead Mall. So he sent an update to the Friends of Hampstead Mall last Sunday about the history of Columbus Street as a very thriving Main Street community in the city of Charleston, like 100 years ago, in the early 1900s. It wasn't only African-American, it was populated by a mix of diverse residents of the city, but there were a lot of Black businesses that thrived at that point in time. And it's just a really fun retrospective. And I do think that it could be something that, we could use as a illustration to people who can't imagine what it's like to have a lot of Black businesses flourishing along the low line, for example. So I think I'll send it to you, Adrian.
Just one other information item. I spoke with the chair of the Public Safety Committee today, and they will be having a discussion regarding the contract that was approved for the evaluation of the racial bias audit. The committee will be meeting on Monday at 2. If anybody wants to listen in on that. Public Safety Committee, yes. So to be clear, the contract has been approved. It's supposed to start March 1st. The terms required that the consultants receive a payment before the contract starts. And I thought I heard in another meeting that the check hasn't been written yet. So it's not clear when they're going to start the work. So, but this conversation, it would not prevent the work from going forward. It's just for questions of clarification of scope and timetable. So just want to make, and again, that is one of the recommendations from the Criminal Justice was that an evaluation be done. All right, so that's another example of something that's moving forward that we should be tracking. The contractor is the contractor who is currently has been advising the department on this work. Anything else to come before the group? Then a motion to adjourn is in order.
I move that we adjourn.
Second, undebatable, we're done. Thank you.